Imagine this. It's the summer of 1941. You're flying a Spitfire Mk V over northern France, convinced that you know the rules of aerial combat. Altitude means advantage. Speed decides. Surprise brings victory. But suddenly, a plane you've never seen before appears behind you. It's faster, it climbs better, and its guns tear your aircraft apart. Seconds later, you're spiraling down, and you realize everything you thought you knew about dogfighting no longer applies. That aircraft was the Focke-Wulf Fw 190, the machine that broke every rule. In this video, we'll explore how the Fw 190 changed aerial warfare. We'll talk about its development, its technical strengths, the shock it dealt to the Allies, legendary missions, and we'll ask why this plane became the symbol of a new era in air combat. At the start of the war, the Luftwaffe relied almost entirely on the Messerschmitt Bf 109. It was agile, fast, perfect for dogfights, but also prone to deadly flaws. Its narrow landing gear killed more than 1,500 pilots in accidents, and its liquid-cooled engine was extremely vulnerable. Kurt Tank, chief designer at Focke-Wulf, wanted more. His vision, a fighter that was robust, versatile, and powerful. The first prototype flew in 1939, equipped with a mighty BMW 801 radial engine, wide landing gear, and better visibility for the pilot. Even in early tests, it was clear a revolutionary fighter had just been born. On September 1st, 1941, the Fw 190 made its combat debut against the RAF. Spitfire pilots suddenly faced an enemy that outclassed them in almost every way. Climb rate. The Fw 190 could gain altitude faster and dictate the fight. Firepower. Two 20mm cannons in the wings, plus machine guns in the fuselage. A single burst often shredded a Spitfire. Durability. The radial engine absorbed hits that would have doomed a Bf 109 or Spitfire. Maneuverability. Despite its weight, it was surprisingly agile, especially in dives. The RAF was stunned. Within weeks, pilots spoke of the Fw 190 shock. One later said, "It was as if we were suddenly fighting an aircraft from the future." Until then, aerial combat had been dominated by the classic dogfight. Circling, out-turning, close-in duels. The Fw 190 rewrote the script. Its pilots no longer had to rely on risky maneuvers. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, diving at high speed out of the sun, unleashing a devastating burst, then climbing away before the enemy could react. This concept shattered old doctrines and revealed the future. Speed, firepower, and toughness were more decisive than tight, turning fights. For Britain, 1941 to 42 was a nightmare. The Spitfire Mk V was outmatched, hundreds of planes were lost, and operations over France had to be scaled back. Only with the arrival of the Spitfire Mk IX in mid-1942 could the RAF regain some balance. Until then, the Fw 190 ruled the skies. One of the most bizarre episodes happened in June 1942. German pilot Armin Faber, confused during combat, mistook the English coastline and landed his Fw 190 in Wales. For the British, it was a gift. They examined the plane, finally understood why their Spitfires were outclassed, and used that knowledge to develop counter-tactics. Many German aces swore by the Fw 190. One was Joseph Pips Priller, infamous for his attacks on Spitfire formations. He became legendary on D-Day when he and a handful of Fw 190s boldly swept over the Allied landing beaches. Other pilots loved the aircraft because it could survive hits that would have destroyed a Bf 109. The BMW radial engine earned the nickname "a tank in the sky." One Allied pilot described it bluntly: "The worst nightmare we faced over France." What made the Fw 190 unique was its versatility. It wasn't just a fighter. A-Series, the standard fighter dominant over France; F-Series, fighter bombers that shredded tanks and columns. Sturmbok variant, heavily armored, with 30mm cannons and rockets, built to rip American bombers apart. Pilots had to close to 50 meters before firing. One recalled, "It was like flying straight into a wall of bullets." Night fighters, used in wild sow tactics, improvised bomber interceptors over Germany. Dora 9 Fw190D-9, with a lengthened nose and stronger engine designed to counter the Mustang, nicknamed the Long-Nose Dora. To 152, a high-altitude development capable of 750 kilometers per hour, one of the last true high-performance Luftwaffe fighters. More than 20,000 were built, with over 13,000 from the A-series alone. The FW190 wasn't built in just one place, but across the Reich. The main plant was the Focke-Wulf factory in Bremen, but production soon spread. Arado, Argo at Orchesleben, and Fieseler also built large numbers. As Allied bombing intensified, manufacturing was moved into underground tunnels and bunkers. In Thuringia and Saxony, secret facilities operated under brutal conditions. Much of the labor came from forced workers and concentration camp prisoners, a dark chapter in the history of this iconic aircraft. It was on the Eastern Front where the FW190 proved especially brutal. Here it faced Soviet aircraft like the La-5 and Yak-9. Agile, yes, but often undergunned. Against the armored Il-2 Sturmovik, the FW190 was deadly. Its 20mm and 30mm cannons could punch through the flying tank. Whole armored columns were destroyed by FW190 fighter bombers. Soviet reports mention sheer panic when the roar of the BMW 801 engine drew near. For many Red Army soldiers, the sound alone was a herald of destruction. The FW190 made its mark in several key battles. Schweinfurt, October 14, 1943. Dozens of FW190s attacked US bomber formations with rockets and cannons. Losses were high, but the assault showed the aircraft's lethal punch. Operation Bodenplatte, January 1, 1945. Hundreds of FW190s and Bf109s struck Allied airfields. The surprise worked, but poor coordination and inexperienced pilots led to catastrophic losses. For many, it was the FW190's last major show of force. D-Day 1944. Only a few were available, but some FW190s still attacked Allied ships and positions. Symbolic, even if militarily insignificant. Not all stories were about glory. Pilot Paul Ratz once had to crash land his FW190 in a swamp after engine failure. Later it was discovered. Forced laborers had deliberately sabotaged the aircraft. It was a stark reminder. Even the most advanced plane wasn't invincible, not to the enemy, and not to resistance within Germany itself. From 1943 onward, the tide turned. The Allies fielded the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that could match the FW-190 and escort bombers deep into Germany. Fuel shortages worsened. Spare parts ran out. Training collapsed. Many late-war missions were flown by barely trained pilots, overwhelmed by the machine they were given. The Dora 9 and Ta-152 arrived too late. On paper, they were superb. In reality, they were outnumbered, and the Luftwaffe was already collapsing. The FW190 was more than just a plane. It was a revolution in the skies, smashing the old rules of dogfighting. Speed, firepower, versatility, these were the new laws of air combat it introduced. For many Allied pilots, it was the butcher bird, the predator you couldn't escape. For the Luftwaffe, it was both a peak and a bitter reminder that even the best aircraft couldn't win a war alone. The FW190 broke every rule of air combat and carved its place in history.